USCHO.com. This is the USCHO Weekend Review podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online at USCHO.com. A look at this weekend in college hockey and a review of the top news of the week.
Welcome to USCHO Weekend Review for Monday, November 29th, 2021. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly and Derek Schooley. First of all, now that we're on the other side of it, I hope everybody had a happy Thanksgiving. And I know, Derek, you had a pretty good Thanksgiving weekend.
Yeah, it was really a great weekend. We went down to Nashville for my daughter's girls hockey tournament and really kind of saw the who's who of Robert Morris hockey. We had could have had an alumni reunion with Logan Biddle, who was with the women's program, Paul Colantino with the women's program, and Chelsea Walkland. I mean, you go down the list of people that were there, and I got a chance to go to the Predators game and see one of our alums that is working for the Predators. But I think the really neat thing about it was the fact that I got to see a college hockey women's tournament. And we always talk at Christmas and Thanksgiving about tournaments and how it could be a prelude to a Frozen Four. I saw a national championship tournament caliber game between Colgate and Minnesota for the finals of the Smashville Classic. And they got a guitar for winning, but it was block shots, physical, high speed, high pace. And Colgate came out on top against Minnesota, and Minnesota had beat Colgate twice earlier in the year. And these are two of the top 8 teams. And then you threw Mercyhurst and Boston College in the mix. And I saw 2 really good hockey games. And Mercyhurst obviously could be a class of the CHA along with Penn State. But I don't think, as we're moving towards the holiday season, we're going to see a lot of tournaments. And we got to remember, and Jimmy, you were at the Three Rivers Classic when we played Lowell the one year. These are preludes to NCAA tournament matchups, and people take them that way. And there's something to be said about winning a championship. And with that, you have a championship game. They say that this is a mock Final Four, and you could sell that for your team. But this was really played like that. So it was really neat to see a national championship tournament women's game this weekend.
Yeah, Derek, you referenced UMass Lowell, and I've worked for a number of years for Norm Bazin. And one of the things that he always says, it's kind of a motto of his, is he'll play in as many in-season tournaments as possible and look to win them all, because he says that every in-season tournament is a dress rehearsal for an NCAA regional. It's not just that you play 2 games in 2 days and there's a champion at the end, but it's the fact that you have a weird game time. You might start at 1 o'clock or 4 o'clock, and you've got to get guys thinking outside of the 7 o'clock mentality and understanding that your pregame meal might be, breakfast or brunch, and it's not always chicken parm, stuff like that. It's just, it's the preparation. I think that's, kind of what you're saying, Derek, is these tournaments are really useful in building, kind of what can be those moments that you're going to experience later in the season.
I think Jerry York called it tournament season, championship season, and he uses the bean pod as that example. And he played in the Three Rivers Classic a couple of times, and it's neat. Tournaments, like you said, you're playing different opponents. You have to scout the other opponent. You don't know who you're playing. You got to watch 2 teams. I mean, and to watch this transpire last weekend in Nashville with the theme of country music was pretty neat, and I know it was pretty special for the women that were involved.
Well, back in the glory days of the WCHA, there was probably no better rivalry in that league than North Dakota and Minnesota. They met up for a non-conference series this past weekend. Minnesota won on the road 5-1 on Friday. North Dakota got an early lead on Saturday and hung on to the win. Minnesota's been up and down. Let's talk about them first. Does this tell us something about how good Minnesota is or what their potential is?
I think it certainly does. The fact that they can come out on the road, fast start, played really well, a hard-earned 5-1 victory, and then you knew that they were going to get a response, and they did from North Dakota on the second night. And the Fighting Hawks get a goal in each period. They jump out to a 3-0 lead, but Minnesota wasn't done, and that just shows that they weren't just happy getting a win on Friday. They wanted to get something out of Saturday, and they fell a goal short, but I still think that this says a lot to me about Minnesota. I know I moved them up a spot or 2 in my ballot this week just because of the fact that I think that they are a little bit more battle tested than the Minnesota teams of recent.
And I think that's one of the things that we've been waiting for is the real Minnesota team. I think we talked about it, the buy or sell time. You know, where are the Gophers and how are they going to be? And to be able to have this per se heavyweight name battle between North Dakota and Minnesota, the glory years of the WCHA, where they have all four teams in the Final Four, and to be able to have that is something that's really neat. And do we think they're good? I think time will tell. I think that's a great step towards it, and we'll see where both teams moving forward. Because, and we're going to talk about the dreaded P word and PairWise later, but there's a lot of Western teams that are high up there, and I think this will be could be the launching point for maybe Minnesota to take a little run here in the Big Ten.
There were also a couple of series where top teams had maybe a lighter or easier opponents, although there's nobody you can take a night off against, as we'll get to in a moment. Michigan swept Niagara 4-1 and 6-1 at Yost Ice Arena. Also at home, Minnesota Duluth with a sweep over Alaska 5-1 on the first night and a 1-0 overtime victory. What kind of a weekend is it for those teams when they have a lighter opponent? Is it a chance for the coach to work on some things, get some different players in the lineup? How do you approach something like that?
Well, I think, the funny thing is you talk about that, and I learned when we went to North Dakota one year, these aren't light opponents. We had an average team, but they can't afford a loss. And if you look, I expected, like you said, some changes in the lineup and things like that. Michigan went with Portello both nights in net. And if they were looking at this as a light opponent per se, and I use that as, anybody can beat anybody. We swept the number one team in the nation when we had 4 wins. So to use the word, I know you're reading from a script, Ed, but to use the word light, I think is disrespectful to all of college hockey. So I'll go off that. So I don't know who wrote that script, Ed, but to say that it's light, they didn't take it light, or they would have, you would have saw a different goaltender in there for Michigan. And I think that's where it is. And if you do take it light, you're going to get beat. You're going to get beat. I'm sure Miami wasn't thinking that with LIU on the first night. So I really believe that the teams that are in the high level that are looking at a number 1 seed and looking at a 2 seed and in that, say, top 10, they can't afford a misstep right now. So they're not going to take that light per se. By
the way, as the person who wrote that script, I will say that I did put in parentheses, please find a better word if you have one. I noticed that didn't happen, but
find one.
I think that, these are great tests for the best teams. It's the test to see what, not maybe the talent you have, but maybe the resolve you have inside your locker room. And can you go out there against an opponent that you should beat and actually execute? And you know what? The fact that Minnesota Duluth only got that overtime win, so that's, basically 55% of the PairWise point instead of getting the whole 100% of the PairWise point. I actually didn't put them number 1 on my ballot this week. I'm not going to tell you who I did, but I didn't put Minnesota Duluth because I still think that was a test that they maybe didn't pass. They were supposed to sweep Alaska and they didn't. So I look at Michigan, boy, they passed the test 100%. 2 solid efforts against Niagara. That's a very battle-tested team, by the way, Niagara. They've played probably one of the toughest non-conference slates of anybody in the whole country. And at the same time, they win in were successful and pulled off those wins. Coaches look at those wins as gut checks. They're not easy games. They're pains in the butt to put on the schedule where you have almost no upside as a coach. If you lose the game, you're dead. If you win the game, you got almost nothing in terms of credit and PairWise and RPI. So I guess, I know that everybody has some thoughts on how you build schedules and whatnot, but I think you put opponents like that on your schedule, you better win those games if you expect to be a top 4, top 5 team.
And if you lose, you're paying for those losses through guarantees. So you can't afford to pay to get losses.
Let me ask you a question, Derek, and I don't want to put you too far out on a limb on this one, but if you're putting together a non-conference schedule, are you better off putting together a schedule where everybody you're playing is going to be a real challenge to beat, or are you better off putting together a schedule that has some tough teams and some teams that you would consider to be similar in skill level to your team?
Well, I think it depends where you're at. And I think if you're at some of the higher level programs, you're going to want to make sure that you build some of these, per se, lighter games in, which in no disrespect to be anybody in a lot of different conferences. So I think it just depends of where you're at, but you're going to want to be competitive. I think one of the biggest things is, and when we talk about PairWise and things like that, is you have to make sure that you get home games in return at times. There's a fine balance between getting guarantees, because guarantees need to keep your pay your stick budget or pay your overages or pay something like that at some point. But there's a fine line between guarantees and getting home games where you have a better chance to win at home than you do on the road. And maybe that's why I'm looking at where the situation we're in at Robert Morris right now. We wanted to get home games. We wanted to play Penn State in our building. We wanted to play Ohio State in our building. We wanted to play, we had Arizona State coming for 2 this year. Instead of getting guarantees, we thought having the high level teams in our building would help us out more than, a guarantee, where if you get 50 grand, great. But you're still spending 25 to go to North Dakota on travel. So you're only netting 25,000. So a lot of it depends on your scenario and where you're at and what your school's philosophy is.
Well, let's move on to Minnesota State. They had a split on the weekend, a 1-0 loss to Lake Superior State on Friday. They gave up a power play goal and only allowed 10 shots, and then only allowed 5 shots from Lake State on Saturday. Dryden McKay didn't play on Friday. I don't know that it would made that big a difference. He gives up a goal sometimes too. But he got his 30th career shutout on Saturday, and as I mentioned, he only had to make 5 saves. I don't know if there's a whole lot we draw from that. You're going to lose a 1-0 game, even with a fantastic goalie performance, and it sounds like they pretty much just smothered Lake Superior.
Well, I think we had this text conversation between us. I mean, I think that's a really impressive performance to give up 15 shots total on the weekend. I mean, not just in a game, total in 2 games. There were times where we obviously they weren't playing Penn State because Penn State throws the puck to the net from everywhere, but you're looking at a performance that I ask the question is there some sort of record? And obviously, if you go way, way back in the history of hockey, there were probably some games that ended up in a blowout where not many people got shots, but 5 shots in a win, that's impressive. And but also impressive is 15 shots against the whole weekend. And if you were to say, hey, you'll give up 15 shots on goal in a game, you got a really, really good chance of winning. But if you're going to give up 15 shots in a weekend and you're going to lose one, oh my God. I mean, impressive performance to get a win by Lake State, impressive performance by Mankato to give up 15 shots. And I think the biggest loser might have been the fans, because not a lot of offense in those games.
Well, thank God it was Thanksgiving. You probably didn't have as many in the stands, at least students. But hey, who's happier today than Damon Whitten? I mean, his team got a split against the number 1 team in the country and only got 15 shots on goal for an entire weekend. I mean, that's pretty good. And at the same time, they only allowed 3 goals on the weekend. That's pretty good as well. I mean, I don't know what this says about Lake State, if they could be a better team and give a lot of challenges and be a tough team to play against down the stretch. Obviously, they'd like to generate a little bit more offensively, but you end up with 15 shots in a 2-game series. You're averaging 7.5 shots a game, and you're 500 against the number 1 team in the country. I'll take that any day.
I thought it was another one of our stats.
I did too.
I thought there's no way. When I saw that and read it, I had to go back. I looked at both box scores from both. I thought that was a complete and utter, here we go again. And then we're going to talk about it, and it's not even close. But unless somebody's going to come out there and tell me that both stats groups are wrong, I mean, that's where we got.
If you're in the first round of the NCAAs and you're the number 16 overall seed and say you're Lake Superior State and you get that kind of a 1-0 win over the number one team, that happens all the time in the NCAA tournament. That's the kind of thing that can happen in a single game.
I hate those because we had our best team at 24. We had 24 wins the one year and we were in Rochester and we got 50, almost 60 shots on goal and lose in overtime. I mean, though that's hockey. It's unfortunate, but that's hockey, and that's hockey that way at 1-0. And it'd rather happen now in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, than in March in Fargo, North Dakota, or wherever they're going to be in that region.
Well, we're getting towards the end of non-conference play in Division I men's hockey, and we're going to take a look when we come back at how the different conferences did over the past week. Some good things for some leagues and not so good for others. We'll take a look at that when Weekend Review continues.
This is the USCHO Weekend Review podcast from US College Hockey Online.
Welcome back to USCHO Weekend Review for Monday, November 29th, 2021. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly and Derek Schooley. Well, we've been watching non-conference play, and we'll get into the dreaded P word, the PairWise, in a moment. But non-conference play overall for a league has a lot to do with how many at-large bids a league might get. Sort of works almost as a band that you can see at the end of the season, grouped by conference. And so it was a good weekend for Hockey East. They had some difficulty at times, and not so great for the ECAC. Jim, do you want to kind of give your analysis on those?
Yeah, some of the numbers kind of struck me. Hockey East went 9-3-0. They had the best winning percentage. To add 9 non-conference wins, they play on a whole season. They play 110 non-conference games. So you're close to 10% of those games this weekend became wins. ECAC, on the other hand, they were 4-11-1 out of conference. They play 114 non-conference games in a given season, and they just added 11 losses. So it was like 10%. I think it was on Friday afternoon, I was about to call the Holy Cross and Brown game, and I just happened to look at the non-conference standings before that game and said, oh, ECA is having a pretty good game. They're, I think they're about 538 or something. So, a little bit above 500. Well, at the end of the weekend, unfortunately, they have dropped to about 480. So they lost, 50 percentage points in the non-conference rankings, which is kind of staggering. Other conferences to have decent weekends. NCHC, they don't play a ton of games out of conference, just 80 total, and they went 5-2-0. Big Ten, they only play 70 non-conference games. They went 5-2-0 this weekend. So, just looking at it at this point in the season, we've played about, by my math, about 81% of all of the non-conference games out there. So there's not a lot of opportunities. The Big Ten and the NCHC have played almost all of their non-conference games at this point. And they're probably feeling pretty good because they both by far have those two conferences have the best non-conference winning percentage. So there's not a lot of opportunity to fall. On the other hand, Atlantic Hockey, ECAC, they have the most games remaining percentage-wise. I guess Hockey East has a pretty good chunk left. So they can kind of sway either way. ECAC needs to start getting wins, and Hockey East needs to win to stay where they are. But you can kind of, we're getting down to that crunch time where there's not a lot of non-conference play remaining. So each and every one of these games becomes a little bit more magnified.
Who's really been giving the ECAC trouble non-conference is Atlantic Hockey, which is 7-5-1 against that league. And I know their commissioner, Bob DiGregorio, said to me that he really wants to see Atlantic get the winning percentage over ECAC this season, as he's kind of looking at that league as a measuring stick to where Atlantic is right now.
Well, you're going to see a lot more games being played here with the holidays, whether it's the weekend before break at like the 16th in that area, the 17th, 18th, 19th, and then you'll see when they come back the holiday weekend. I know Atlantic Hockey's got a big weekend of non-conference games, the like over the first, because I think that they've left open that weekend for non-conference games. So you're going to see a lot more games, and you're going to see, I think once you hit past the holiday season after that first week, you're going to see pretty much minus a few games here and there, most of the non-conference games being done.
Well, on that note, with all those non-conference games pretty much being done, Jim asked this question. We had a little fun with this on Twitter last night, too. Should we use the PairWise word yet? With some teams having played close to half their regular season schedule, and some when they go into the Christmas break having played more than half of it. And I guess I want to preface the discussion on the PairWise by saying, if we're going to use it, we need to use it the right way. And my point on this is, if you're going to use it to look at who's in a good position for the NCAA playoffs, because that's what it is looking at, who's going to be there at the end of the season. The problem with using it too early and using it in the wrong way, as if it is a ranking of how good teams are, is the incompleteness of schedules and some of the pieces that go into it that may be more arbitrary than based on numbers that rank teams on different things. We got so much in the way of analytics now. You can tell a lot about teams, and it doesn't tell the difference between a team that had 6 losses by blowouts or 6 teams that were in close. It doesn't really tell you some of the intimate details. The other part of the PairWise that I just want to remind people of is that it never used to be published before January, because that's when it started to make sense. Then as more sites than USCHO started to publish their own, it turned into an arms race. So who can get it up first and be the one that's the one of record, to the point where now it gets published from day one. And then you see weird things like Harvard winning its first game of the season and being number 1 in the PairWise, as if that actually means something. So, Jim, you've spent a lot of time looking at this. I think that if you use the PairWise right now, you have enough sense to use it now in the right way. You're not using it like fanboys or talk show hosts that use it to pump the tires of their favorite team.
No, certainly. I mean, I've always taken a very analytical approach with the PairWise, and I understand the volatility. You know, if you're, say, number 4 in the PairWise this weekend, you get swept, the odds of you dropping down to 10, 11, 12, maybe even below the Mendoza line of 14, 15, 16 is very realistic. So whereas, you do that in the final weekend of the season when you've played 32 games already and you've got a body of work behind you that's more solid, you can lose 2 games and maybe drop 3, 4, 5 spots instead of 15. So, let's start there. But, I just look right now at some of the trends, and it's kind of crazy that it shows how West dominant the PairWise is. And we just referenced the fact that the Big Ten and NCHC by far have played most of their non-conference games and have the best by far non-conference records. So we shouldn't be surprised by this. Does this mean that we're going to have an NCAA tournament with, 16 Western teams and 3 Eastern teams? I'm sorry, 13 Western teams and 3 Eastern teams? No, we know that's not realistic. We know that, other conferences, Hockey East in particular, have good enough winning percentages and play tough enough schedules that they'll get a couple of teams in no matter what. But does this say to me that we might see a year where we get 6 teams from one league in? We haven't had that often. I think Hockey East did it once, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe NCHC had 5 in it once, multiple times. Yeah, it's really possible. It does feel like we're trending that way. And it does feel like that the top teams, and when we get to the end of the season, the number 1 seeds overall have a chance to be all Western teams. So that's just some of the trends to watch right now. I'm not trying to say that means anything, or that we can define that, we're definitely going to have a Western team as the number 1 seed in Worcester and a Western team in Albany or wherever the regionals are. I think I got those cities wrong on them, but you know what I'm saying is that we are in a position where we're trending toward the West having a really strong presence in this year's NCAA field.
Can you imagine the outcry, the letters, and everything that's going to happen if there are more Western teams and Eastern teams? The battle will be real. We had that issue last year when we looked at the teams, and I think we ended up I don't know if it was a 9-7 or a 10-6 split you're going to have the 3 auto bids right off the bat. So it's not going to be 13-3. But like you said, it is trending that way. And you've got, can you imagine if Quinnipiac wins the ECAC, UMass, who's at 13, and Lowell playing the finals, and they're 14th, and then you get the AHA team. I mean, I wouldn't want to be on that committee. I mean, your hands are tied by the computer, but how you're going to maneuver the who's playing where and when. I mean, that's like you said, I don't think it's going to happen. I think it's going to end up evening out, but it's not trending in a great direction for the Eastern teams right now, in my opinion.
Well, the thing you mentioned, Jim, about Big Ten and NCHC being near the end of their schedule, their numbers in their RPI and in the PairWise are going to kind of converge towards the middle, as most of their play is in the league. And with Eastern teams still with some non-conference games in there, they still have some ground to gain. So I think you're going to see a trend of things meeting a little bit more. You're going to see some teams bubble up, whether it's UMass or Quinnipiac or so forth. So I think you'll see 9-7, 10-6 in the PairWise itself as we go along, but it's not going to be the disparity that we might be seeing right now.
There's a reason we talk about the non-conference overall percentage of a conference, because it does show the strength of the conference, but there's still cannibalization within the conference. And can the 4th, 5th place team in one of those 2 conferences lose 4 games to the first place team in the second half of the season and watch their stock just drop in the PairWise? Absolutely. And that's what usually happens. And if it doesn't, then you get a bunch of teams that are kind of middlers around 500 in their conference. You might have, 6 teams that have a winning percentage of 550. And that actually can be what is most beneficial for a conference, because then if you had a strong non-conference slate, then you're all boosted up. And those 2 teams that were the ones that just were totally eaten up in your conference, your 6th and 7th if you're the Big Ten, or your 7th and 8th if you're the NCHC, those 4 teams probably got crushed somewhere along the line, and the other teams beat each other up, head to head.
And then you still got Clarkson that's in it at 14, and you got Northeastern, you got Providence at 16 right now, and Northeastern.
A lot of bubble teams, yep.
Yeah, and Cornell at 8-1. I mean, and they're 20th. I mean, they still got a lot to go, and that's a good hockey team. So you've got a lot of teams that are still going to make their way into that field. And I didn't pay attention enough in math class and all that stuff. I was on the committee. I was just, hey, tell me the different scenarios of how this is going to work. And thank God you got a computer this year to pick it out. That's for sure.
I want to add one last thing about the PairWise before we move along. And that is that the PairWise changes from year to year and has changed over the last 15 years that I've been watching it closely. If we go back through, we can think about things that have been included. You used to have your record in the last 20 games as a factor. That got thrown out. You used to have record against teams under consideration. That got thrown out. And along the way, there was the so-called Bentley rule that used to say that if you won a game or you won your league tournament and became eligible for the NCAA tournament, you automatically became a team under consideration, added to that. So then records against teams under consideration would factor. And had Bentley beaten Holy Cross in the year that Holy Cross beat Minnesota in the NCAAs, then you would have had both Bentley and Holy Cross in. And they said, oh, we can't have that. So they changed that rule. And then they've added the quality win bonuses. Those numbers have changed in the way it's calculated. And then this year, to a lot of consternation, and I know, Derek, you've heard it, I've heard it, there are a lot of coaches who just do not like this 55-45 split on overtime. And I think we're going to see that changed. If the kind of feedback I'm hearing and that you're hearing is the case, they're going to end up changing that. So the PairWise year to year changes. And the reason it changes is they look at it and say, okay, this may not be what we wanted. Let's see if we can do this to make it a little better result and get the right teams in the tournament. And correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I think that's why it gets changed every so often.
And don't forget about the Quinnipiac rule back in the late 90s, where Quinnipiac was at the MAC, and it was the MAC, and they were running the table. They hadn't lost very much. And I remember playing a coach. I was at Air Force at that time, and we played a coach like a week or two before, and they said, hey, we really college hockey needs you to beat Quinnipiac. And I was like, well, what does that mean? And it was because of that they were, I don't even know if they were going to be like a number 1 or 2 seed, even if they lost in the final. So that was then changed. I mean, it's self-serving at times for people to change rules and look at rules but I really believe that, people have it in their best interest to make it right for college hockey. There's everybody, when they talk about this, is self-serving, but the guys on the committee are doing what's best for the game of college hockey. And that's why you haven't seen campus sites yet. That's why you haven't seen 2 out of 3 in the first round, because that's not what's best for college hockey at this point. Maybe down the road it will be in 10, 15 years, but right now the people are doing the best they can to make sure the best teams are in the tournament.
Well, let's move on to our last segment. A couple of milestones reached over the weekend. There was a little reminiscing on my part, because back in late spring of 1999, I was one of a half a dozen people at a press conference when Wayne Wilson was announced as the new Division III head coach at RIT. And certainly what has happened since then was not expected by anyone. Wayne Wilson reached a milestone last weekend with his 400th win at Princeton. And another milestone in the same conference, Brian Riley coached his 600th game at Army. Derek, these are 2 men you've gotten to know very well over the years and have coached against. Your thoughts on these milestones by these 2?
Yeah, those are tremendous milestones. It's congratulations to both guys, both great people, both have college hockey and in the best. They're in the best interest of college hockey. They're here for the right reasons, and for Wayne to get 400 wins and Brian 600 games, and it just shows you the longevity of these coaches and the fact that they've done things the right way. I mean, I've got 600 games, but I'm not even close to I'm 125 away from 400, and to be able to put those kind of numbers together, and obviously Wayne's, it shows that they're doing things the right way. They're running clean programs. They're running programs that people respect in the world, and congratulations to them, because good people and good milestones. And you know what? Hopefully, we'll see Brian at a lot more. And you know, Wayne's obviously going to keep accumulating wins. So congratulations to those guys.
You know, and you use the word longevity, Derek, and I don't think you get longevity if you're not a gentleman. And you look at the list of everybody that's hit some of these big milestones: 500 games, 500 wins, 600 wins, 1,000 games, 1,000 wins, Jerry York, 1,100 wins. You know, everybody that's hit these milestones, they're all real gentlemen. I look at both of these guys, Wayne and Brian, is just so caring about the game of hockey, and that's a big part. The stat I really wish that I know that Army West Point has to have this somewhere. I'd like to know how many games have been coached by Rileys there. It's got to be over 2,000. If Brian's got 600 already. I remember when Brian took over as coach, I was on his beat. And he had Rob, his brother, before that, and Jack, their dad, before that. I mean, I feel like they have had maybe even 3,000 games coached by a Riley at that school.
You know what? And then you throw Brett in the mix of coaching, and not just even at that school, but as a family. So, like I said, there's not much more you could say that you just said it the right way. Good people, and they do things the right way. And I'm lucky to call them both a colleague and a friend. So congratulations to Wayne and Brian.
Well, it seems like a good place to wrap up for this week. For Jim Connelly, for Derek Schooley, I'm Ed Trefzger, and we'll catch you next time.
This has been the USCHO Weekend Review Podcast, a production of U.S. College Hockey Online. Visit uscho.com/podcasts to listen or subscribe.